Um, So as many of you know, Jim Hanson is a landscape architect who now works in land conservation for the East Bay chapter of the Native Plant Society. Most of his career work was managing environmental restoration projects on large public works construction in the 9 Bay Area counties, and where he learned to appreciate why conserving these complex natural systems is best. Jim became active on Point Molate over a decade ago when the massive casino project was proposed. A conservation advocate and volunteer for the California Native Grasslands Association, and knowing that Point Molate was home to extraordinary native coastal prairies, Jim challenged the casino EIR consultant's characterization of the Point Molate grassland as only naturalized annual weeds. His talk tonight will be a snapshot view from many visits there of Point Molate's special native plant communities, their beauty, and the stewardship challenges to keep them. I'll turn it over to Jim. Thank you, Jim.
Great. Well, hi, everybody. It's good to see you, and I see some familiar faces and names. And so, yeah, let's just get on with the show. Whatever happened, we got it fixed, and thanks for your patience. So I'm going to share screen and take you on a little tour of Point Molate. So the one thing about this is that okay. So we'll just keep the side things because we'll just keep them. Let me just say a little bit of what we'll be kind of running through a little bit, because climate topography and geology are very important to plants there. And it's a very interesting story that this kind of Point Molate is almost kind of an island in time. And, you know, it affects what grows here and why, both the indigenous and the introduced species. There's some really cool ID and observation tools that I'll share with you, some of you may be familiar with, that can help you learn on your own some of what's out there on this whole, basically peninsula, which includes on both sides of the bridge, because they have a direct relationship with each other. And we'll just say a little bit about what an oversized development would do to the flora there, just to give a graphic example, and talk a little bit about management and looking forward. So here we go. You'll see an early map, and some of you may be familiar with this, but I'll just point out this big green area right here. And then we'll take a little closer look at it geologically. So this is a photograph of a geological map from the late 1800s. And I think the thing here, I mean, obviously there's a lot of, the Bay Area is a real melange of layers and everything else. There's a lot been going on here. But, you know, if you take a look, you'll probably obviously see some similarities and some differences. And we look closely at Point Molate here, and what used to be a historical marsh, some of which is still there, that separated the mainland from really Point Molate, which geologically is connected with the Marin side, China Camp, and that whole area there. And so this is more the Franciscan Complex, is what they call the Franciscan Complex. Great book by Doris Sloan on the geology of the Bay Area. Talks about it some more. So this is the basalts and the chert, the radiolarians from the ocean floor that just kind of was like peanut butter when it hit subducted here on the plate, North American plate. And so Point Molate has a relationship geologically, and therefore some of its soil chemistry, with Ring Mountain and Rin. So we'll the photo on the right is just a little bit a close up, and of course Chevron is now in this area, and a lot of it has been filled in. But at one point, there was just a little road right over here that would connect people to that whole Potrero San Pablo. Just a kind of a note, Potrero, and I meant to look it up again just before the talk, is Spanish, some of you may know, for pasture, which gets into what we're looking at now. So this is a photo you may have seen, but I don't know if in the process you may have kind of taken a look at the background. And this is Point Molate here. Of course, this has been chopped off at some point in time, but you'll notice, do you see a forest? Do you see shrubland? Well, maybe a few things here. We'll talk about what those might be. But this was an amazing and still is mostly native perennial grassland. And these are bunches that we'll look at in a little bit. But if we go and just take, and so this was late 1800s or so. And then again, this is another photo that you may have seen historically, and this is kind of fun to look at because you'll have an idea of what it looks like now. Now, I don't know if this was the first line of eucalyptus trees, but they've moved quite a bit. They've made themselves home on this entire northern watershed, as you well know. But again, a very different landscape originally than what we find today. So here's a view. It's fun to go back. If you have Google Earth, it's now a free app, and you can go back historically and look at earlier photos. This, of course, is Winehaven over here. The South Watershed. Here's where the original road is, and where the drum lot is now. And of course, part of this hill was shaved off. But again, a grassland situation. And we look at it today. So that line of eucalyptus has moved all the way up to the top of the bluffs in this period of time, a little over 100 years. And then if you look over here on the right, instead of the grasslands, of course, we didn't have a color photo before, but besides the tanks that are still there, a lot of more shrub type flora in addition to the grasslands that are still there. So this has changed over time. If it did have the burning that the early Ohlone would have done, I don't know, but that would have taken care of a lot of the shrub growth, which a lot of this is coyote bush and other things. So the flora of today is very different tomorrow, but we still have a good representation of what used to be through the species diversity, plus the introduced plants that are there. So, you know, you can sometimes take a look at plants, but I find it really helpful to look at a place and look at the kind of communities that are there. The communities have associations of plants. So if you're looking at grassland, you're probably going to find some bulbs early in the spring. You're going to find some subshrubs. You're looking at shrublands, and particularly the coastal ones, there'll be a sage and maybe a coyote brush and a toyon and so forth. It's a way to really learn a place by kind of looking at the plant communities. And there's a rich variety of plant communities at Point Molate, which makes it a lot of fun. So you've heard of Mulatte fescue. So here's a picture on the left. And on the right is the California grass, the purple needlegrass or Stipopocra. And this is that characteristic that if you're walking through a landscape, we're used to seeing the annual introduced grassy weeds, but naturalized grasses. But these are the bunches that some of these plants have been recorded to be, in fact, when I was on the board of the California Native Grasslands Association, we talked about the grasses as California's other old growth, because some of these plants have been studied to be over 100 years old. And The Mulatte fescue on the left became a Mulatte fescue because it has a little bit more of a gray tinge. And so it was introduced into the trade by David Aumy probably about 20 years ago. One of the fun things about the bunch grasses, in addition to their deep rooting, which is attributed to a carbon storage function too. We look at, sometimes they talk about treeing a place. The bunch grasses can have a very important role in carbon sequestration because they pump soil deep into the carbon deep into the ground. So when those roots die out, they stay there and are considered to be rather stable over time. But anyway, this is the Mulatte fescue in flower on the left. And what I wanted to say is that a couple of things. There are a number of species of native grasses out there: meadow barley, blue wild rye, California oakgrass. But I'll also be talking a little bit about the introduced species that sometimes we can get along with. There's one called scarlet pimpernel. It's fine. Things like star thistle are a problem because they are very competitive. They do take a lot of water out of the soil, and they're nasty if you walk into them, as you probably will know if you've done that. I'm just showing a little picture too of a skipper. It's hard to talk about the entire ecology of a place, but it's important to talk about some direct relationships. So there are a number of butterflies and skippers that use the grasses and the other plants out there as larval plants. So we'll mention a few of those. Here's another major plant community. This is the coastal sage scrub. And you'll see the sage plants along here. This was taken, I think, from the point itself. Yes. And one of the popular plants is Artemisia California. If you go out there, it's kind of very feathery and gray. Just take a little piece and smell it. It's rather cool. These are, we talk about butterflies and skippers. Well, there's a lot of species of moths too that use these native plants as larval plants, and they rely upon them. Some of them are plant or plant type specific. So if the plants go away, the butterflies, moths, and others that depend upon them go away. And that has, you hear about the kind of the food chain. There's a really interesting talk, fellow that's given talks to Native Plant Society and others, Doug Ptolemy, where he talks about the relationships between plants, native plants, their host insects, particularly the caterpillar stage, and then the birds. The birds in there, when they have fledglings, are entirely dependent upon caterpillars. That's like a high energy bar for them when they most need it. So we've actually learned to accept the fact that if some of our plants are eaten up a little bit, I have a cercis in the front yard that has some nibbles out of it, and that might be okay. It may have fed a young fledgling bird. So let me just talk next about the forests. Well, not very many. I mean, remember those early slides. And we do have the introduced eucalyptus, which can become quite thick and dense and drop a lot of, actually, tinder. But if you look up in the hills and even along the road going up from the beach park on the bay side, you'll see this plant that many of you have recognized. It's the toyon or heteromeles, sometimes called Christmas berry, another good food plant for birds. There are toyon at Point Molate that if you look up in the hills, people say, oh, look at the oak. Well, there really are no oaks at Point Molate, at least ones that were there originally, at least that we can find. But the toyon in some cases have developed these huge trunks. I mean, these are old plants. They've been there a long time. They're the real McCoy, and they are dotting the top of the hills and in different parts. That's the closest thing that we have to an original tree, as far as I know, or anybody else has at Point Molate. And then we've got riparian wetlands there. You're probably familiar with the drainage right across from the beach park, where there's a lot of willow growing. Well, here's an arroyo willow. And within that, at spring and early summer, a lot of you familiar with the pipeline swallowtail. And here's the larval stage and the unique California native plant that it depends on, which is the Dutchman's pipe Aristolochia. So these are kind of, they're hard to find, but I just wanted to include the leaf because it's this kind of unique heart-shaped leaf that will grow in this riparian area, sometimes through the willow, some just kind of hanging out in there. And at certain times of the year, this pipeline swallowtail is, as you know, just fluttering all over the place. And they have this wonderful iridescence. They're very cool. To the right is a photo by Jack Scheinman, who's taken a lot of great photographs that are on the Point Molate Alliance website. And this is a really grand old arroyo willow that's growing in that particular drainage. So again, a lot of different plant communities, a lot of different plants that are adapted to them, which includes the beach strand. How many places along the bay have you seen a kind of a stretch of sand like this? It's actually it's very cool, and it's also a very unique habitat type. Growing within some of the sandy areas, of course, you'll find ice plant, which is what's called one of the halophytes. These are plants that will limit salt intake through the roots, and they'll also have special ways of exuding salt from their stems. So here's two natives that have been found in the beach strand. Saltmarsh sandspurry and fleshy jamea. And I'm mentioning ice plant because it's growing in that same condition too. It was introduced at some point, somehow got in. Fortunately, it's a fairly easy one to pull out, get rid of. It's heavy, but it's kind of quite controllable. But these are especially adapted to this particular community. And then we dive into the water and see the eelgrass. So these are some photos that the California Audubon put together in a booklet that talks about the relationship between the eelgrass, the sea life, and the bird life in the bay. And I just opened it up and grabbed a few photos. I don't know if any of you have seen the herring runs that come in at certain times, but you can see one of the examples. These are all herring eggs on the eelgrass. So you can see how structurally this plant has so many wonderful values. It's kind of stays within about, I think, no more than about 3 feet or so roughly. It still needs light to get in. And you can, if you were go to the bluff, which is the day when we get to go really experience Point Molate and go out on the bluff, you can look out in low tide areas and you'll see these big circles in the water, in the shallows, and it goes out 100, 200 feet. You'll see these big circles, and those are the beds of eelgrass that the San Francisco State University Marine Lab uses as a research and a nursery site to take some of the plants and restore them in other parts of the bay. So this is a very important location, both here and around the corner at the Dotson Marsh. So that's just kind of a quick look at some of the plant communities, some of the kind of common plants that you'll find there. But boy, there's a lot going on out there. There's a lot of the original flora still there. There's introduced plants, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I just wanted to mention two very wonderful tools that we have accessible both on computer and by phone app. And one of them is CalFlora. And of course, here's a map of Point Molate here. There's a program that they have called What Grows Here. So you can take a little polygon, draw a little polygon. It's not hard to learn how to use. And I did this around Point Molate and took a screenshot. And it'll show all the plant records of people who've taken plant records from Point Molate. And so, in fact, I wanted to check out the beach strand because it is a very unique type of feature along the bay, very rare. And here's that sandspurry that R.A. Chasey took a wonderful photo of, down here, in 2022. And it shows up with a GPS point by making an observation. And that's something that you can do too, as you start to recognize plants and fill them in for different areas. I'll jump to the next one, which probably a number of you heard about or use, which is iNaturalist. And this is also a shot from Point Molate. Now they are saying that they have close to 5,000 observations from the Point San Pablo Peninsula. And they're talking about 812 species. Now, the thing that iNaturalist does a little bit differently is that they take records of insects, as you can see, birds, reptiles, and plants. They take all the fauna, and just to provide a full picture of the diversity of a place. And as I believe this is actually worldwide, but it originates out of some really skillful people from this area, I believe from Cal, who are still in the California Academy of Sciences that are still continuing to work on this. There's a phone app with this one that I will say I haven't used yet, where you can, but I have seen people do it when I'm walking a trail, load the app and take a picture of the plant, and oftentimes you get an identification. It takes, I still am constantly learning. There's a lot of plants in California. It is a hotbed of biodiversity. And so this is a kind of a handy tool. And this is also a way that you can make observations as a citizen scientist to fill in what's going on in a place. But these are two tools that that you can call up in the field because you can get phone reception and look at the plants of the area. If you're looking at something, you might be curious what it is. Of course, in addition to any really cool field guide that you may have. I'm just going to jump and just say it's a real adventure out there. There's always something to see. There's always something to find. There have been some bio blitzes, and people who, a number of you are familiar with the site, know that. And I do just want to kind of say what the still in the balance, the state actually provided the Park District recently with funding for the purchase of Point Molate. But as you know, it continues to be an active issue locally. But I wanted to show you, if you don't know, what the current plan is from a grading map that came out of the Point Molate EIR that SunCal and the City Planning Department put together. And the reason I wanted to point this out is just to show that what we do out there has effects. The red areas here, if you're not familiar with the grading map, these of course are the contour lines that would be put in. When they're really tight like this is a really steep slope. It's really steep. It could be 30 to 45 degrees. And then the red is removal of dirt, and that was where a hill is. So that could be up to 50 feet from the current elevation. And the blue is fill. This is a drainage between the what's currently the drum lot and the knoll next to it. And this would be to create a road. So these are fill spots. Some of these are 50 feet of fill. Now, one of the, just in kind of knowing, because we all have a stake in Point Molate, this is from the EIR. Just wanted to share, this is something that I took right out of the EIR, and this is the development footprint. And during the whole discussion about, and going before the Planning Commission, the city, former city council, the current city council, one of the things that concerned me was, you heard about 70% open space in the current settlement agreement. And this is all the hillside floor up here and all through here. Well, if you look at the development footprint, and these are the black lines that show the grading limits, and these are the areas that would remain open space, what looks like 70%, what looks like the highest percentage of open space? Well, I don't see it as up here. I'm seeing it in here. And just so you know, because this keeps coming up and this is still an active issue, I took that map and I put it on a Google Earth map so I could get acreage. And what Google Map told me was that the actual open space was not 70%, it was 40%. And maybe it could be 50% if you counted these really steep cuts in here. But I want to show you an example of a steep cut out in the Point San Pablo Peninsula. This is at Brickyard Cove on the back hill. And this is what a steep cut looks like. And currently in the current plan, if it goes forward under Jim Levine, this is what the current plan would do in terms of open space. This is now called open space according to that plan. So yeah, I just wanted to provide some perspective of the impacts of different development decisions on this remarkable spot. And then we've got to talk a little bit about weeds. This is a big patch of French broom, pampas grass, growing in this coastal scrub. Here's a Monterey Pine. They are having problems in the Bay Area, as is some of the eucalyptus, because of the drought. They tend to need a coastal situation with fog drip and moisture. They're, of course, Monterey's originally from the Monterey Peninsula. It's now all over the world. It's grown as paper in Portugal and New Zealand. But this is one of the things that we will want to take care of over time to, basically be able to keep some of this wonderful diversity, both in the grasslands and in these coastal scrub areas, which when we had a member of Audubon come out on a hike, they described Point Molate as a rest stop for birds on the Pacific Flyway coming down and coming across the bay and having a place to land and rest, probably eat a few insect snacks and keep on their way. So it's an important area. You're probably familiar with the osprey that have returned to the area, but there's a lot going on there that we're really glad about. So, looking forward, this could be, to me, hopefully the picture we see in the future. And I wanted to kind of go through this quickly to give you a chance to ask any questions, but just also to share some tools that are very useful and to give you an idea of ways that one could begin to understand the landscape based on where it came from over years of geology and soil development and the kinds of plant communities that have associations of plants that it's over time has really begin to understand kind of what grows in a place. So I'll just go ahead and stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. That was fantastic. Thank you. I just, we're going to take questions, and Sally Tobin will be managing the questions. She'll be calling on you. If you can raise your hand electronic hand. She'll call, and if you'd like to put something in the chat as well. Yeah, that was a great presentation, Jim. Yes. So please raise your hand to ask questions.
Okay, I'm not seeing raised hands. So I'll ask a question of my own. One question I have is, during the time that the shrimp camp was there, I didn't realize until we had a presentation maybe a month ago that that they actually boiled the shrimp at that location in these huge kilns. And I'm wondering, do you have any idea what they were burning?
Good question. Good question. You know, what comes to mind, as you know, China Camp State Park is right across the way. And during you know, kind of this learning more about Point Molate, I went over there, and it's really a worthwhile trip because they have some of the history of how the whole shrimp camp worked and the drying of the shrimp. And so a lot of it was also dried on these big tarps, from what I recall. But it was a you know, part of the whole industry, and some of those kinds of questions might be answerable with a little trip to Marin. And of course, going along that China Camp State Park, that shoreline is just beautiful too.
Oh, thank you.
I'm dodging the question.
And an artful job too. Jamin, you have a question. Oh, you're muted, Jamin.
There we go. Sorry.
Thank you.
So I was really fascinated by the slide that you brought up where you overlaid the map of where the actual houses were going to be versus the actual geology. When they were talking about open space, like that ridge line, I was looking it through, trying to follow some of the paths. Like it's fairly inaccessible without having to dodge between buildings and of that development. So, I mean, it's like, are they literally, I'm shocked that I'm not shocked, but I'm shocked that they're literally counting like the space between the house as if it's open spaces. And that those sheer cliffs that are like sandy soil, so they're completely unscalable, as again, part of open space. Now, I mean, like, does open space have some sort of term where it's not meant for actual people, or is it only meant for birds and apparently mountain goats or something? Because that was something that I had not realized when I had seen a lot of the overhead shots, was just how inaccessible they were even making what open space that they had said that they were going to have. Not that it hopefully won't make any difference in the long run, but it's just like the duplicitous nature of it is astounding.
Well, you know, as any of us who have worked and done advocacy, when somebody doesn't want to tell you something, they make it very difficult to get a straight answer. I did ask the attorney that was hired by the city, for his last name was Marsh, during the design review, and I basically never got a straight answer, I would say. And I did ask for a overlay on Google Earth by the city and through their consultants. And so it's been very difficult, but yes, from a lot of people who looked at the current plan, you'd have to go through some of these streets to get up to these trailheads. And it even seemed like originally they were looking at Stenmark Drive as open space. Mm-hmm. And then we called them on that. Yeah, I think they're, if you look at, I looked at the state code, and CNPS included the state code on open space as part of our EIR comments. It's commonly seen as natural, open, accessible somewhat, basically a area in a natural condition,
Mhm.
quote unquote, because everything's been affected historically one way or another. But it's, it's was challenging.
It also seemed like a number of those lower units would have been literally staring at carved down hillside too.
The same thing is the case at Brickyard Cove. If you're go outstairs, because I know some folks there, and that's how I got the photo. That's what you see when you're leaving your door.
Thank you.
David Helvarg has his hand up, and then we have a question from the chat.
Sure. Jim, I was thinking maybe some of those steeper slopes could be defined as Suncal's duplicious schist. But
Formation of some kind of.
right, but what I'm really curious is there's one, as far as I know, only one unique endemic species with Point Molate fescue, and yet it's hugely popular in the whole gardening industry. And maybe you could talk more about that.
So it's more of an thank you, David. Yeah, it's considered an ecotype. So it's actually red fescue is one of those plants that's circumpolar. It grows in a lot of semi-moist situations, probably in Europe, Eastern Europe, and but this one is unique, just has unique characteristics, probably shaped by the soils and the winds and the salt, and a little bit of oftentimes a grayish appearance, and sometimes a little shorter statured than maybe another red fescue from another area. But it was selected and it is slightly rhizomatous, very fine leaf. But it's kind of cool that it's Molate fescue and it's used in the trade.
Thank you, Jim. Yvonne McHugh asks from the chat, other than the Monterey pines, are you seeing other stressed parts of the habitat and species? Could you say something about the coastal prairie or coastal bluff species?
Sure. Yeah, they're a little difficult to get to these days on the coastal bluff. And I will say getting up to what we call the bluff, there's a little road that goes up right off of Stenmark, but it's behind a gate. And when we're able to get tours, we can do that. But you find the Dudleyias are growing up there, this wonderful, beautiful little succulent. Of course, a lot of the sages, coffeeberry, toyon, and although these particular birds aren't kind of dependent on those species, there's an updraft. And sometimes you can be standing on the bluff. And that's why I think it's just a wonderful place in the future to take kids and families. And you're almost looking straight in the eyes of an osprey or a gull or something that's just floating there on this updraft. But it is a rich species for bird life, of course. And there are several locations. The inland scrub is a little different, but it's a little thick. So I have to say I haven't walked through it. Right up above the drum lot, but that coastal bluff that you saw is just really very resistant. It's been there a long time. And in terms of stressed plants, certainly there are pines there that are dying out, as they are if you've driven San Pablo Dam Road and looked across the reservoir and just seeing scores and scores of pines that are winking out. They do need moisture. They do tend to need the fog. The acacia and eucalyptus, you'll see I'm trying to remember the name now, epicormic growth on the eucalyptus, because it's been stressed, and so it's growing from little nodes, and it's leafing out along the bark and some of the branches. So those are not in healthy condition. They may be it's hard to follow it. Some people are really working with it. As land managers in our public lands know what's going on directly. Acacias have had an issue in the Oakland Hills. And so some of these plants are facing the effects of the long-term drought. We're not seeing it as much in the oaks. We are still seeing some sudden oak death, but we're not seeing, big patches of oaks and things that are having serious problems, at least that I know of.
Thank you, Jim. Pam Stello has a question. You're muted, Pam.
Hi, thanks.
There you go.
It's my understanding that the diversity of the native plant communities at Point Molate can't be replicated. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, so there's a whole profession in restoration sciences, and a lot of these folks gather through Society for Ecological Restoration California, which has annual conferences and so forth. There are some things that are easier to restore than others. Getting oaks established in the right location. So we heard a talk on CNPS by Carol Witham, who was involved with the vernal pools down the UC Merced. And I asked her about that during the talk, and she said they've had some success in recreating these hard pans to get the vernal pools and some of the native flora that grows specifically along this kind of bathtub line of the vernal pools. And you find a lot of those near Rio Vista and so forth. But grasslands are tough. And one of the reasons, and C&J just put out a 30th anniversary edition by Dr. Val Levener from UC Davis, wrote an article. And one of the things that really caught my attention was, you've probably heard on Netflix or a number of things about this whole underground mycorrhizal fungal system where trees communicate with each other. I mean, they're still really looking at that, but the plants evolved with the fungi. And what they've found out recently with the native grasslands is that they have a different mycorrhizal association than the annualized weeds, which are these kind of oats and things that you can pull up one stalk. These are the things that just really took off when the Spanish, I think, mostly brought hay and things for the huge cattle operations that were going all over California at the time. And so these mycorrhizal associations actually can inhibit native grassland restoration. And they're very competitive. The weeds are very competitive anyway. So you lose a grassland, they're tough. And you lose the bulbs with that, a lot of the spider and other kind of bug life that grows with it, including some of the grassland birds have become more rare. So there are different kinds of systems that we just don't understand well enough it's better just to hold on to them and leave them.
Thank you, Jim. And let me ask another question from Yvonne about what might be your vision for Point Molate if hopefully the East Bay Regional Park District purchases this land.
Sure. Well, a lot of us have been dreaming for a long time. And I will say that as a landscape architect and a Richmond resident, following, just a slight aside to say that organizations like the Trust of Public Land have looked at the role of parks in the economic development and quality of life and health of a city. And these are just as important as water mains and street lights and fire services. They are what makes a community work. and you can read, and some of the people I know who are in psychology have read where the wildlands are necessary for young people to be able to take in complexity. There's nothing like nature to teach you visually in all kinds of ways, that just neurons to learn complexity. So very important in this day and age. So vision, a lot of people have been working on this. I think for me that in particular that South watershed is a priority in so many ways, because it has the kinds of features where people can be near the water, have gatherings with families. There's ways to go up and walk into the hills, which a lot of us have done. And there's also space for sports and recreation in the former drum lot. So that's, I guess you always look at what makes sense to you. I think the North watershed, where the eucalyptus are, does have coastal scrub patches within there. It's very cool to walk through there. Some of there may be a little bit too much eucalyptus, but that is an area that could also be restored over time, and the hills above the wine haven. So, and that, let me just say that there is, there was there was a reimagining the Bay Area or something, a Rockefeller grant, where everybody did all these big plans around climate change. And one of the plans called for a floating bridge between Point Molate and the landfill. Now, why would you do that? Well, that would mean that Bill or Knox, Point Molate, the landfill, which has a walk around it. I mean, it doesn't sound very exciting, but it's actually it feels like wilderness when you're out there looking out on the bay. Goes into the Dotson Marsh all the way to Point Pinole. I mean, what an amazing urban park. What an amazing urban park. So there's a lot of opportunities. We'll just kind of take it one day at a time. But I think we're going in a good direction because of a lot of work of a lot of people.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Jim. I don't believe we have any additional questions. That was fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you for your patience and your resilience. And we hope to see all of you next week as well. Thank you again, Jim.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Bye.
Jim.